Logic Session Players is probably the best feature that Logic has to offer for anybody who is a composer or music producer, because with these session players you would be able to, basically speaking, complete the band that you don't have access to at that very point while you're writing the music. Because through the use of the session player you would be able to add drums, keyboards and bass, and all of them will be programmed by the computer, but this is not AI slop. In very simple terms, these session players are, basically speaking, glorified sequencers that are still very dependent on your understanding of music production and of course music theory. But they are extremely easy to use, and I will show you how to take advantage of them right away. So let's begin. Welcome back to Logic Pro 12. In front of us we've got the project that we're going to be using to produce this track or showcase these features. First and foremost, let's listen to it. This is what we got so far. Okay, let's add some drums first. The first thing to do is going to be just creating a new instrument session player, and I'm going to select drummer. If I recall correctly, drummer was the first session player to be introduced back in Logic Pro X. Now we're presented with this yellow region, which is the one representing the content of the drummer or the performance of the drummer, if I put it in a different way. Now, of course, I'm going to put it where my track is playing, and also I'm going to turn on the cycle. Now, let's press play and see what happens. Okay, it's playing to tempo. That's already a good thing. Now, you might say, well, it's kind of boring, I don't like it. And this is the point in which you will start to see that this is not generative AI. First, you got this very big area, which is the editor window. And in here you will be able to change, for example, you don't want the hi-hats to be the ones playing over there as the cymbals. So I'm going to swap it for probably the crash. Let's see. You can see that just by turning on and off all of those buttons, I added or removed elements of the performance. That's why I keep telling you that this is not generative AI, because this is basically speaking expecting you to dictate or order what kind of stuff you want the player to play as part of your track. It's very dependent on you. Now, controls. You will see that you got over here complexity and intensity. Those guys over there are basically speaking telling the drummer how many notes, in the case of complexity, will be played. As you can tell that as soon as I push this slider further, we get more and more of these tiny elements. These guys over here represent notes being played by the performer. So I'm going to press play again and see what happens. Easy to understand, right? I'm going to duck down the complexity because it was a little too much. Now, here is where you can change the pattern, rhythmic pattern of the independent elements of the drum kit. For example, here you got the controls to set the interactions between the kick drum and the snare. And one of the things, we'll be able to take advantage of this function later on, which is the chords. More on that later. Then the track, we can ask the drummer to follow my performance rather than the grid. See what happens. It feels way more natural than before. This is because now the drummer is actually following my swing coming from my recording rather than just playing strictly to the grid. Fantastic, right? It's adding a little bit of extra liveliness, for a lack of a better term. Now, a little bit more of the controls are here. We can add more fills. And no, this is not Phil Collins. This is actually adding more or less fills across the performance. We can add or bring back the swing, making it to push or pull, depending on how you feel like it. And of course, the fill complexity. The controls are very easy to understand. Now, on details, we will be able to be more precise on the control, we can be more precise on the way the drummer is playing. Why? Because, for example, we can use, for example, here, we can ask the way that the drummer is hitting the snare, it can go full on rim shot, full metal. We can bring in percussions, such as a tambourine. Ghost notes, so on and so forth. As you can tell, it's very easy to understand once you get your head around it, right? And on manual, once again, and this is probably the best feature, we control the whole performance through the use of a step sequencer. Very similar to what you would do on something like a group box. And what would you do here? Let's say I want double bass action. Full on metal, look this. But I'm gonna add it a little bit more prog rocky, let's see. Of course, since I didn't add any drums, let's see. I think this is kind of dumb. Let's do it like this on the downbeat. Awesome, right? As you can tell, this is far from a generative AI tool such as Suno, for example, which is not necessarily giving you this level of control. And also, once again, for those of you who might be on the fence with the morality of this, you can tell that I'm actually basically directing the drummer rather than letting the computer come up with ideas for me. Now, drums are easy, its rhythm is not necessarily as complex as something melodic or harmonic driven. So what about the bass and the keyboards? Let's play around with those. I'm gonna remove this editor for now, and also one thing before I move over to the next section. See what happens if I remove or slim down that section and then duplicate this error here. Both of them are gonna be playing the exact same thing, but there is something very nice about this. Let's say that I wanna move, for example, this region or this first half of my riff. The drummer is playing on the hi-hats. But on the next one, I want it to play on the cymbals, on the higher cymbals, and in this case, I want the drummer to go bananas and go for crash. Here we go. See what happens. You'll see that it's gonna change. And also you saw that it's kind of aligning the fields to morph naturally into the next region. That's how you can actually construct and build a very, not necessarily complex sounding, but appropriate sounding drum track. Let's add some bass to this. So far, we understand that the session players are controlled by the tempo of the track. But since we're going to be adding an instrument that is not only rhythmically driven, but also harmonically driven, we need to find a way to tell Logic what notes the bass players should be playing while the track's playing. Okay? So how to do that? Easy. We're going to be using what is known as the chord track. First, we need to bring in the global tracks over here by pressing G on our keyboard. And then I'm going to right click anywhere in this area and I'm going to click on chord. Now we added an extra track on that particular section, the global features. And why am I going to be using this guy? Great question. I'm glad that you didn't ask. This is what we're going to be doing. First, I'm going to select my guitar track and I'm going to be dropping it over here. And as you can tell, now this region is populated by wherever that is. Those are chord progressions. And this is one of the new features that were added to Logic Pro 12, which is the chord ID. In this case, it's using machine learning to detect the chord progression of the given track that you drop on it. And yes, it also works with MIDI. So let's begin. One of the things that I have learned by working with this particular function is that sometimes the detection, although very precise when it comes to the chords and the notes being played, tempo might have issues because of not incorrectly detecting the tempo, but because of swing. So I will like to first make sure that this is correctly aligned in tempo. For example, we got here that this region or this chord change is not necessarily aligned to the grid. Let's see why. Okay, it's because I do that particular slide over there. So the chord, I basically recorded this swapping chords per bar to make this exercise easier. Let's see. Now I got this. I got my doubts over here, but it might be just a little flare that will be added by Logic. If it doesn't work, we can simply delete it. Okay, now let's add a bass player. After setting correctly the timing for my chord changes, I'm gonna create a new instrument track, and in this case, session player track, and in this case, I'm gonna select bass player. You can see here that we got a good chunk of options, including electronic music kinda driven, such as synthesizers, or more bass playing stuff, right? Like rock music, like real instruments. Well, that's a joke. I love synthesizers, you can see. Okay, with that being said, let's select something pop rock just to stick to the vibe. I'm gonna create, and hopefully, allegedly, the track will follow correctly the chord progression. First, I'm gonna, of course, get my bass close to the guitar, so that way it's gonna be easier for me to, well, of course, see both of them at the same time, because I'm gonna be using the recording of my guitar and the bass to detect or to see if the propositions coming from Logic when it comes to the chord progression are correct. I'm gonna mute the drums, of course, so we can be focused on the sound of both instruments. Let's see what we got. As you could hear, there are some areas in which the chord detection didn't work as expected, but in all fairness, the chord progression and the chords I played are not necessarily easy to detect by ear, so let's address them. They're quite easy. Over here, we got our region, and you should treat them as if you were dealing with an audio region or MIDI region. And I will double click on it, so that way I have control over the different segments of my chord progression. And the problematic areas are this area over here and this area over here, these two chords. Hey, sorry for interrupting, but if you want to support the channel, just click on the like button underneath. It helps a lot. Let's continue. This guy should be A flat minor, so let's address it. I'm gonna select this guy after double clicking, then I'm gonna look for my A flat, and I'm gonna select minor. And one of the good things about this is that you got the preview. Yeah, that's the chord. Now let's test it. This second area has a similar problem. In this case, we're dealing with A minor. Major, sorry. So I'm gonna select like that. Let's see. Excellent, right? And similar to what happens to the drums, you can control the behavior of the bass player by double clicking. And you got similar controls, complexity, intensity, we already understand what it does. But we got dead notes, which is added more of the tuk tuk, as part of the performance of the player. And similar dynamics, the feel, which is similar to the drag and pull, the swing coming from the drums. And the manual, once again, a grid controller. So let's play around with this. Something that I like about the bass player is that you can also tell the player how low or how high the notes being played by the performer are going to be presented to us. See what happens. Excellent, right? It has plenty of options. Now, let's add keyboards. I'm gonna do the same. And now that we already set our chord progression correctly, Logic will automatically detect and populate the track with a proper performance from the player. Here we go. I'm gonna select keyboard, and in this case, let's try something broken chords. Create. And once it's loaded, Logic is gonna show us a properly aligned to tempo and aligned to the keys keyboard performance. Let's see. Once again, there's a tiny mistake over there. We can do it, let's address it. By simply double clicking over here, Even though the bass player was correctly presenting the notes and they are working in tandem with the rest, once you bring in more notes to the chord, you start to see that there are problems. Because in reality, this is not necessarily an A minor, major chord. This is in reality a C sharp minor 7. And the rest. But now we got this tiny section right here that I think is not helping us in any way, shape, or form. So let's see. I'm going to press play and let's listen to the entirety of it. Okay, we got it running, right? But one of the benefits of this is that now I can, for example, change the drums for electronic drums to see how it fares. Let's do it. I'm going to once again create a new instrument track, in this case drummer, and I'm going to select EDM big room, because obviously. Now let's see. I'm going to remove this guy. Well, it's similar controls, basically the same as you got on the drummer, but in this case applied to the drum machine. And let's see. I'm gonna remove the drums. And now that we're rocking this kind of David Guetta style of things, how about if we swap the bass player for an electronic bass player? Instead of creating a new channel, I'm just gonna double click on my bass player and I'm gonna swap the bass player for a pump bass. Change session player, of course. Now see what happens. Nice, right? And before you get enraged by the advent of Skynet and in music production, let me show you something. If I right click over here and I select convert to MIDI, now what we got is actually a MIDI region. As I told you, the session players are basically sequencers, and you are just interfacing with them using a much more human-like kind of language, rather than just pressing knobs and twisting, pressing buttons and twisting knobs, if that makes sense to you. I think these guys are extremely useful for crafting ideas on the spot, to develop new songs, and I use it quite often here when working with musicians that I'm producing music for. Because that way, if only the guitar player shows up, we can begin developing a track from the scratch, just using the guitar player ideas. And once the rest of the band appears or shows up in the studio, we can show them that and we can develop the track further. These by no means will replace any form of musician, because for as much as they are very good, you saw that there are some caveats with it. And this kind of tools requires a lot of understanding when it comes to, as I said before, music production and also music theory. One more thing before we leave. You might be saying, dude, what happens if I am not that versed in music theory? Not a problem. There is a way for you to take advantage of the Chord ID software. Let me show you. By right-clicking over here, I'm going to select create a new chord, and now we got the same settings as before, but there is an extra function that we haven't explored in this video yet. Bam, 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 the MIDI input. What does that stand for? It stands for this. If I turn it on, and let's select the piano, so that way we can have the input. If I turn on the MIDI input, I have a controller here over here. Let me show you. Okay? And then click on the MIDI input function. If I press the chord on the piano, now we got it. Amazing. And let's confirm it by using the preview. So as you can see, you don't need, necessarily speaking, to have a deep understanding of music theory. For as long as you're capable of playing some notes on your keyboard, you can take advantage of this fantastic function. And now that I got my chord progression in proper order, I can simply move stuff around and develop a track from the scratch just using this. It's amazing. And since we're dealing with MIDI, we can do to any of these areas. For example, let's go to the drummer and turn it into a MIDI region. And look at this. Now we can go super in depth when it comes to programming the drums the way we see fit. These are great for just giving you a starting point when it comes to programming drums, which is something that I happen not to like as a composer and as a music producer myself, because it's kind of tedious. But I understand the importance of it, and it's very good. So who is this for? For any single one of us who happens to be a music producer or composer, because these tools are excellent for developing ideas from the scratch, fast, easy, and intuitively. Also, you can learn plenty of music theory by just exploring the different chords and the different scales that it has to offer, because it will show you the results real time, and you will learn the patterns little by little as time goes on. So it's an excellent tool for you. Even though the video is about to finish, don't think that this is all that the session players have to offer, because what if I tell you that you can control instruments that are not necessarily the ones that are built in Logic? Because yes, you can use the session players to control third-party plugins, and also you can use them to control analog synthesizers. If you want to see that in action, there is a video somewhere on the screen in which I show you how I got my Moog Motor 32 to be controlled by the session player on Logic. With that being said, thank you for joining, thank you for watching, and as I say every single time that I meet you, I gotta remind you that you should never let anybody tell you what to dream about, and remember that I will see you when I see you.